Every time I start a video, I always think to myself, how can I make this intro more lasting? And that train of thought always pulls me back to the same spot, which is, damn, this damn Twitter video I'm gonna use to open this one is gonna be so funny. But for this particular one, I feel like using a funny meme to open a video exploring the depths of abuse would be, a little tone deaf. I don't know, showing you guys something I found on TikTok and then following along with clips of serious mental and sometimes physical torture feels wrong. So I'm not gonna do that. The BSD abuse cycle. Yeah, you've probably heard of it. The topic has been being discussed for a good few years among the fandom, and I feel like a vast majority of us have reached a similar conclusion. Mori abuses Dazai, Dazai abuses Akutagawa, Akutagawa abuses Kyouka, and Atsushi saves Kyouka, so no more abuse. But what if I told you guys that this interpretation is not only incorrect, but the term abuse cycle is the wrong term entirely? Oh, okay, that's my address? Alright. What many people don't understand about the abuse cycle in Bungo Stray Dogs is that rather than a cycle of one abuses the other like that one meme, it's a deep complex web that roots at not a person but a phenomenon. I sent this script to my pal Groovy to beta read and he said something really interesting. The abuse web in BSD is more like the clavipes. That's how you pronounce it. Alright, I hate the English language. But yes, the abuse web in BSD is more like a clavipes web. There are thick strands of foundation that are meant to anchor the web to trees, bushes, fences, etc. And the actual sticky web is meant to catch insects for the spider. It's not normally pretty or well laid out like that of a Cancroformis, but is really effective and lasts a long time. Oh, and he says that Philly the Trichonophilia clavipes survived the Hurricane Milton and he's very proud of them. Groovy is awesome. Anyways, there are many interesting fan interpretations I've seen of the origins of this web, whether it's a theory that Natsume might have abused Mori mentally or that Mori's unknown origins may play a hand in his character. So keep in mind this is a deep dive and my interpretation of this web. And yes, the abuse cycle is actually an abuse web because, as we all know, 2 of the 3 children Mori heavily manipulated did not force his teachings onto another being. On top of that, there's a certain Oiran dress mafia executive that plays her hand in this web as well, and another universe where this cycle continues to rear its ugly head. Another thing I'd like to make clear before we dive in is that abuse is an explanation, not an excuse. Obviously, Dazai's treatment of Akutagawa is his way of projecting how Mori treated him. The same goes for the latter's treatment of Kyouka, but that doesn't justify the way they've treated their victims. There is nothing wrong with liking anyone in the cycle, but remember, it's important to hold characters accountable for their actions instead of erasing them or excusing them. For most, every action in the cycle is a result of something else. It's a domino effect of sorts, so keep in mind that everything isn't black and white, unless we're talking about Akutagawa's color palette. Dazai's past abusive actions do not make him an irredeemable asshole who should die. He's just a regular asshole. So, I ask you all to open your minds, tighten your thinking caps, and let's dive into the origin of the abuse web. Before I delve into this, I highly recommend that whoever hasn't watched my video decoding Mori's pedophilic behavior, go right now and do it because I won't be addressing a good chunk of the stuff I said there in this video, so you might get lost as to why I'll be avoiding any mentions of that behavior. Now, throughout the many interpretations I've read through, I've come to the conclusion that most of you guys are desperate for Mori not to be a bad guy, and I'm sorry, but he is one. What many don't understand is that pinning his abusive actions on Natsume is essentially just holding someone else accountable for his actions. Think of it as the way people pin Akutagawa's abuse towards Kyouka on Dazai and call it a day. Now, nothing wrong with this interpretation when it comes to fan works, of course, but keep in mind that saying, oh well, it's Natsume's fault is rather irresponsible, to put it bluntly. You're just deflecting the actions he did using a theory with no basis and painting him as a victim of serious abuse to brush off people disliking him for the way he treats his victims. If there is anyone to blame, it's the war. We know for a fact that in BSD, the war is what traumatized our lovely organization leaders. Fukuji has serious PTSD and that has affected his mind so deeply that he became no longer capable of caring about the lives he lost in his search for peace. Fukuzawa's work as an assassin forced him to take the lives of generals and military bureaucrats to the point that he fell into self-loathing for all the lives he took. And Mori was a doctor. Kidding. Where Mori's role in the war and in the story have never been shown explicitly, we know he's always played his hand somewhere in the background, and the proof is in the pudding when we look at the 15 light novel. That's right, it's time for the adventures of the local teenage dirtbags. Now, something I've never seen anyone talk about is how out of it Mori is in this novel. Let me read you an extract to emphasize my point here. Mori, do you think you can speed things up and cut to the chase? Dazai asked, rolling his eyes. Ah, yes. Mori scratched his cheek with his fountain pen. Of course, he said vacantly. He looked up at the ceiling, then over to Dazai, then to Chuya, and then his palm. After a few moments, he continued. Not enough people talk about Mori in the 15 manga, whether it's the graphic depictions of him being eaten alive on a cross, the way he medicates Dazai and how people took this scene that was supposed to show us his care for the kid and twist into this narrative that he's abusing him, or just this weird emptiness to his dialogues as if his mind is somewhere else. To me, 15 is a wonderful showcase of Mori when he first took the position of the mafia boss. Empty, vacant, still learning the ropes and adjusting to his new position of power. We know for a fact that the war did affect him in some way. If he was indifferent to it, Elise wouldn't have changed because, as we know from my Mori video, she's likely a deep representation of his guilt and flaws. Yosono was his first victim, and as far as we know, he showed no remorse for what he did to her. This dude is heartless. He probably wasn't affected by the war and all the bodies he saw at all, right? But the thing about Mori is that he has many parallels with Fukuzawa, taking over an organization versus starting it, traditional values versus modern ones, adopting an autistic child versus adopting an evil autistic child. Another parallel is the way they feel guilt for their actions. Fukuzawa feels guilt for his work as an assassin and, as a result, quite literally creates a whole agency just to ensure that the boy, who has been canonically called his son by the way, has a place where he can embrace his difference and solve cases. And here's the thing, when Mori feels the guilt of his actions connected to the war, he stuffs those emotions into visibility, disregards them, and we see the results in how he treats Yosono and later Dazai. So we know there is a fair share of trauma on his side from the war too, and instead of fixing himself and changing his ways, he becomes an even worse person. This parallel exists between Fukuzawa and Mori's treatment of Rampo and Yosono respectively. Both treatments come from the same origin, war trauma. And that, my dear viewers, is the origin of the web of abuse. Mori was a general. He needed his soldiers in the front line constantly so that their country would not fall to ashes. Remember, he loves Yokohama. He loves what he calls his city. And we know for a fact that everything he does is to protect it. Killing the old mafia boss before he could start a war between agencies was the correct decision, I'll say it. Remember, Mori is willing to do anything to protect Yokohama. So what's one little girl? What's so wrong with mentally destroying a singular child that would otherwise be out playing with her friends if it wasn't for this war? It's all for the greater good, isn't it? One child versus the life of millions. The decision is so simple. And that is how our first abuser is born. Ruining a little girl's mind all for the greater good. Handcrafting a successor so perfect, the idea of him terrifies you so much that you need to push him so deep into despair and take away everything he cares about just to ensure he doesn't kill you the way you killed your predecessor. All for the greater good. Another thing to note, especially with the cross motifs in 15, is that Mori sees himself as a sacrifice for this greater good he serves as well. He's quite literally being shown eaten alive for the same purpose. Where Fukuzawa's trauma from the war led him to create an agency that allows ability users to remain in peace and to find a place where they belong, Mori took over an organization and thus created the most beautifully written and tragic element in the entirety of the manga. And this victim is only the start of something more sinister. After Yosono is Dazai, a boy who witnessed him killing the old mafia boss. Now, for all the people watching this video who have thankfully never been subjected to serious abuse, I need you all to pay attention. Abusers can care about their victims. It is possible for an abuser to make sure you're medicated and treat you after an attempt. Some of us are lucky. Some of us don't have to witness the sort of mental torture that is realizing that, despite the fact that your abuser hurts you and keeps you in a mental leash, they care. And that is not something in defense of them, by the way. That's something that just so deeply sickening and true at the same time. Mori cared about Dazai, and Asakuri takes every opportunity to show that. Whether it's Mori outright saying that he could not save Dazai in Beast, or the fact that there's a section in The Day I Picked Up Dazai where he outright tells us that Mori gives him health shots and tells him that it won't hurt like an actual fatherly figure, we are supposed to understand that yes, Mori is meant to be Dazai's father. I know that he's his abuser. I know that he's a manipulative piece of shit. but that doesn't change anything. He's not supposed to be a good father, just a fatherly figure. That's yet another parallel Mori has with Fukuzawa, the child that he quote-unquote adopted, and how he treated him. That's literally the whole reason he has an orphanage in Beast and adopts Atsushi. The thing about abusing bungo stray dogs is that it's realistic. There's nothing here that's black and white. Except Akutagawa's color palette, of course. Mori cares about the boy he abused, and you know who else does? Kouyou, but we'll talk about her later. And unbeknownst to many, there's a third victim of Mori's mental manipulation, even if it's less severe. Okay, first I'm talking about Chuya in a real analysis. I'm kinda nervous. An odd phenomenon I don't see discussed a lot when it comes to Chuya is Mori's heavy hand on him. Chuya's loyalty is his most valuable asset to Mori. Remember, Mori is a mafia boss here. He has total control of everyone around him. No, I'm not saying that Mori abused Chuya in any way, but he has manipulated him in the past, and that manipulation has ended with Chuya being one of his most loyal men. Such a fun coincidence, isn't it? Chuya loses everything, everyone he cares about, and suddenly the most powerful ability user in all of Yokohama is bowing at Mori's feet. More devoted to him than ever before, and now with even less distractions. Am I saying that Mori deliberately had Verlaine corner him so that he could watch the events of Stormbringer unfold without any raise of suspicion? Maybe. Well, actually it was Dazai's plan, but the fandom isn't ready to face the music with that one. And it's not alien for Mori to kill off the people or one person one of his underlings care about the most. In Chuya's case, it brought him closer to the mafia boss. In Dazai's case, it pushed him away. Remember, the flags were only initially planted for Mori to keep tabs on Chuya. Mori has a total of 3 victims. One of them was rescued and taken to a better home. One of them grew into someone kinder but alone nonetheless. And one of them was Dazai Osamu, or as I like to call him, the character I'm most conflicted about. Now, I make fun of Dazai a lot in my videos, and we all know that, and a lot of people assume it's because I hate him or I'm finding him annoying. Unfortunately, I think he's rather endearing and complex, and also really annoying. To say that Dazai is a good representation of an abuse victim is an understatement. I'd say he and Akutagawa are one of, if not the best in modern manga. Whether it's Dazai's mannerisms, his little monologues, or just his coping mechanisms, I'd say he's absolutely gorgeous as a character. No matter how bad I insult him, please keep in mind that I would never disregard his abuse or anything about him. Like I said, he's just kind of annoying. Now, most famously, we know that Dazai abused Akutagawa and rendered Chuya with no option but to join the mafia by turning his only friends against him. Tale as old as time. No guys, I'm not saying Sokoku is bad. I'm talking about the canon dynamic and an event that happened in the manga. No one's stopping you from shipping them. No one is calling them problematic. No, Chuya is not a victim to Dazai. Dazai manipulating him was quite literally him implementing the teachings that had been laid on him. Rendering Chuya with no option but to join the mafia was even fucked up, to be honest, but bear in mind that Dazai is just as guilty as he is influenced by his own abuser. Contrary to this, the thing about Dazai's abuse of Akutagawa is that it doesn't come from Mori's treatment of him entirely. Dazai was Mori's successor, and so the mafia boss made sure to keep tabs on him. Dazai couldn't care less about Akutagawa being a successor of sorts, but rather it was him being the mafia executive he was. Yes, Mori did influence his treatment of the younger boy, but bear in mind that we're not going to blame Mori for every one of his actions because, as I said earlier, abuse is an explanation, not an excuse. Mori never physically beat the shit out of Dazai, nor did he degrade him and convince him that he's nothing. Mori's manipulation came from his words and only his words, but bear in mind that doesn't make it any less severe. And no, it was not some quality in Akutagawa that made Dazai dislike him. A fact I've seen more people point out recently is that everything Dazai admired in Odasaku, his deadpan, his demeanor, his way of speaking, all of that is present in Akutagawa. So why is it that he admired Odasaku so much and despised Akutagawa? Why is it that he went out of his way to stamp out all hope for healing out of Akutagawa to the point that he's only able to thrive after he loses everything in his mind? Well, that's just it. There's no particular reason. Akutagawa just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Dazai was never mentally okay in the mafia. Whether it's because of Mori, because of his position, or his suicidal ideation, the person he made Akutagawa into was him outputting his hatred for the world and living. Let's pause here and go to Dazai's second victim. In another universe, that is. Beast Dazai, or Beast Zai as the kids say, is Beast Atsushi's, or Beast Sushi as the kids says, abuser. There, I said it. It's nowhere near as on the nose as Akutagawa, of course, but let's explore what Dazai does to Atsushi to warrant the label of his abuser. Alright, first off, he renders him so horrified of himself that he refuses to take off his collar that causes him severe pain until he bleeds. Alright. His tactic to instill this fear was to deliberately allow Atsushi to go to his orphanage despite him warning him against it, all part of the plan of course. Atsushi kills the orphanage director and finds that he simply wanted to give him a birthday gift. That leaves Atsushi so deeply traumatized that he sees himself as a monster, and Dazai's way of keeping tabs on him is to trigger his PTSD so that he never disobeys him. And afterwards, after almost dying in a fight, Dazai tells him he's fired and then jumps. Alright, okay. That's the guy Atsushi gave flowers to in one. Christ. Anyway, something that interests me about Dazai is how fucking great he is at manipulating people. Takes after his dad, of course. For Akutagawa, the only choice that the current universe Dazai saw was to hurt him until he was irreparable. For Atsushi, Dazai simply invoked a fear in him so deep that he would never even think about being as stubborn as Akutagawa was. But then, am I trying to say Dazai has no remorse for his actions and is just an unapologetic piece of shit? Not in the slightest. Recall from earlier when I said that abusers can care about their victims. Now, let's apply that logic here by analyzing Dazai's actions. The first thing we need to know is that Dazai has all his memories from the main universe in Beast and applies that logic in every action. Whether it's him knowing that Akutagawa would eventually blind himself to logic and storm the mafia, or simply just the location of the Lupin bar. Another thing that we need to know is that in the main universe, Dazai does care for Atsushi deeply. For him to have memories with the younger boy and still abuse him remorselessly would be so out of character and unatonable. But then you look at his behavior more closely. There isn't a moment from the first interaction we see of the two where Dazai doesn't treat Atsushi with at least a little bit of care. He doesn't demand that he bows to him, even going so far as to shut Chuya up and demand that he leave the two alone when they speak. And now you're probably thinking, oh, is that it? He's just a little nicer to his victim, isn't that what Mori is like? But the thing is, Dazai has a plan for everything in this universe. Nothing he does is just a surface level action. I mentioned that his abuse to Atsushi is more to keep Atsushi close to him. Well, there's 3 reasons for this. The first is because we know that in the Dark Era novel, Akutagawa chasing down Guide and attacking him was the first exposure Odasaku had to Guide. You could say that it's because of him their paths crossed at all. The second reason is the main theme of the manga. Do not chase the beast inside of you. Akutagawa is taught not to do so by kindness, by motivation, and by people he cares about. Atsushi is taught not to do so by fearing himself so much that he never even considers ever going on the blind ridge Akutagawa goes through outside of Dazai's direct orders. The third reason is a little bit more complicated. We know for a fact that Dazai pushed Mori out of the mafia so that he would take his place. Now, the thing to wonder is why didn't Dazai just kill Mori the way Mori killed the mafia boss before him? Why did he allow him to live a peaceful life and start an orphanage where he could take care of children just as I discussed in my other video how Mori always wanted to? The thing about Beast is that Dazai is supposed to have no care for anyone but Odasaku. That's why Chuya's character in Beast isn't really a character. It's supposed to show us how deeply Dazai has fallen into the state he's in. So if he is not supposed to care about his past relationships, why is Mori alive when he's essentially just a loose end? Is it because despite what we've been told in every universe, he cares about Mori? No, actually. Think about it. Where does Atsushi end up after the events of Beast? How does he just coincidentally end up in the orphanage of a man who would be able to take care of him despite his severe PTSD better than anyone ever could? And what if Dazai deliberately left Atsushi with a home and a father? Let's look at Dazai's last line to Atsushi: "You're fired." And that's quite literally it. Now, as I said before, nothing Dazai does is just for the sake of doing things. There's no chance he just went "you're fired" for Asage to emphasize what an ass he is. So let's put the facts together. Atsushi knows he's never supposed to disobey the boss no matter what happens due to the dire consequences. He's supposed to put his life on the line no matter what happens to himself. His attachment to Dazai is a mental chain, the same mental chain Dazai had on Akutagawa in the main universe. The thing about the main universe is that he never broke Akutagawa's attachment to him, and resultantly he remains codependent on Dazai until all his memories are wiped from his head. But we know that Dazai cares for Atsushi. So what does he do? He tells him "you're fired." He breaks the mental chain. He opens Atsushi's mind to the possibility of someone caring for him deeply with no ulterior motives because he has no boss to listen to the orders of. Him just jumping from that building wordlessly wouldn't be as impactful as the man Atsushi is conditioned to obey telling him to stop following his orders directly. And he does it because, unlike with Akutagawa, he cares about Atsushi. He does love Atsushi. And he never loved Akutagawa. But that doesn't mean he doesn't regret what he did to him. That regret and that guilt is another reason he's out here assuring Atsushi has a place to call home. Dazai isn't as simple as labeling him as an abusive piece of shit. I'd even go go so far as to say he's one of the best written characters in this manga due to how complex he is. But that doesn't mean we can pin his and Mori's actions on trauma and call it a day. That doesn't mean you need to quote a post by someone with an Akutagawa profile picture talking about how they don't like Dazai and stand with him on the front lines to defend him. People hate him for valid reasons. People hate Mori for valid reasons. That's fine, move on. Not everyone needs to like them. BSD is supposed to encourage differing mindsets and allow people to participate in civil debates on morality. Emphasis on civil because if you genuinely feel personally attacked when someone doesn't like the pretty boy Dazai Osamu, then you need to put the phone down. Okay, on to the next stage. Akutagawa kinda sucks actually. His treatment of Kyouka, where we know it's rooted to Dazai's treatment of him, is inexcusably severe and possessive. In fact, the root of it is quite similar to Kouyou's treatment of the little girl. Both of them tried their hardest to convince Kyouka that out of the mafia world, she would essentially be vulnerable and that real world would eat her alive. But there's one core difference between the two. Where Kouyou's abuse came from the fact that she believed that she was genuinely protecting Kyouka from hoping for a better life, Akutagawa's abuse came from something more bitter and ugly. His abuse came from jealousy. Think of it this way, the man he admires most, the man that he believes saved him, left the mafia and joined this organization without a word. And now Kyouka has received an invitation to happiness as well. She has been given the opportunity to live a better life, to live a healthier life. One that would teach her to be a better person. And him? He's right where Dazai left him. He's right where his abuser said he'd stay for the rest of his life. The reason Akutagawa chases Kyouka down so relentlessly is because of that jealousy. During his first huge fight with Atsushi, Akutagawa tells Kyouka that there is nothing waiting for her. He tells her that an ability like hers, one that causes massacre, will never allow her to be accepted. That, my dear viewers, is projection. One of the major plot points of Beast is people relentlessly telling Akutagawa that he's a being made for evil. And in this universe, he has accepted that role because he's never been told otherwise. He has no Kunekira to hug him and believe in his humanity when no one else does. He has no Tanazaki and Kenji to be his friends despite his flaws and temper. In this universe, he is a being made of hopelessness, and that's why he tells Kyouka that she could never survive. That's him projecting his insecurity and his experience in the slums on her. Part of it is jealousy, yes. But another part of it is that he genuinely believes what he's telling her. His abuse to Kyouka is sickening, but as we know, he talks to her in Dead Apple. And in that manga, he admits that he's happy for Kyouka. He admits that he sees a light in her eyes where he only saw vengeance once, something he saw in himself. But that begs the question, was that an apology? Nope, not in the slightest. The thing about abuse is that no amount of apologies or steps to be a better person undoes the damage you did. Akutagawa's abuser never apologized to him despite acknowledging his strength. Kyouka's abuser didn't do so either. Bungo Stray Dogs isn't the kind of story that shows us problem and solution. Instead, it shows us that our actions have consequences. It shows us that no matter how many steps you take to be a better person, the little boy or the little girl you damaged will remain damaged. There's no such thing as apologizing for ruining a child forever. But there is regret. The biggest example of regret is Dazai. Dazai, who treats Atsushi and Kyouka with kindness. Dazai, whose love for Atsushi caused him to make sure the little boy would have a home in Beast. Dazai, who spoke to Kyouka and gave her hope that she could be a better person when no one else did. And yet, that's still Dazai. The same Dazai who mentally and physically hurt Akutagawa, a literal child, and has led him to stay in the pit he left him in until Akutagawa's mind was wiped of its memories almost entirely. But that's the point. Dazai isn't a great person. He's not even a good person. But still, he's a better person, and that is the point of his character. That's what he's trying to tell us here. If a mafia executive with blood on his hands since before he was 15, if a boy who manipulated and turned someone's only friends against him until he had no choice but to turn to him, if a murderer is able to stand up and just try to be a little nicer, then so can anyone else. But before I wrap up this video, there's a final abuser in this web. Now, I try to remain open-minded when I'm doing research on a character. I like stories driven by humans. That's why manga with a ton of characters and groups are my favorite. A good example is IQ and of course BSD. It's not often that I look at a character and decide I dislike them, and that's what I think makes me a good analyst. However, certain decisions in the manga and of course her own actions are the reason Kouyou seems very irredeemable to me. The thing about female characters in BSD is that a lot of them are villainized due to sexism or simply just cast aside because of it. The biggest examples are Naomi and Teriko, two characters that are considered worse than the people around them for the same shit that the others do. However, when it comes to Kouyou, not only is she sidelined, but I believe that she actually doesn't get thought about at all. And that has resulted in her being pinned as Chuya's older sibling / why-not figure without another thought when she's actually a really poorly written character and almost irredeemable. But let's dissect. I mentioned earlier that Koyo's abuse to Kyouka comes from her genuinely believing she's doing what's best for the younger girl. We learn in her arc, which is really just one chapter, that she was once almost rescued by a man, but some events led her to never being able to escape her situation. We're not told what the situation is, but it likely might be the mafia. Therefore, her abuse to Kyouka is something that she uses to keep the little girl from reaching a better place. And yes, I do understand that this is her projecting her fears onto the little girl. That's often what abuse is surrounded by in this web. But the thing is, Koyo's abuse is rather different than most. Love bombing is a technique abusers use to isolate their victims from other people. They constantly remind their victims that they deeply care for them, often insisting that they care more than anyone else will, and as a result, victims end up confused and unable to tell genuine love and care from this tactic. Kouyou love bombs Kyouka. When we meet her in the story for the first time, the first thing that she does when she sees Kyouka is immediately rush her with the worries and insistence that the agency is poisoning her mind. She even insists that they're using her for her ability. Mind you, this is all before Kyouka can even process what's going on, and that is love bombing. Yes, Kouyou does care about Kyouka. Yes, she believes what she does is right for the younger girl. But this is where the poor writing comes into play. The thing is, we're first presented Akutagawa as a remorseless abuser. Then, throughout the story, we're given more and more elements to learn about his character, and soon, we're able to piece together the fact that his abuse is his reasoning in a more natural manner. It seemed like this was gonna be the case for Kouyou as well. Okay, so she's abusive, and then she tells us that she used to be like Kyouka too, and this is the part where we're given more exposure to learn more. Oh? Was that? We haven't seen her in years? She's been completely shelved and will likely never be elaborated on? Okay. The thing is, what we're left with is jarring. Literally just the abusive part of her character and her going, "Oh no bro, this happened to me too, you gotta listen." And for that reason, she feels 10 times more shitty than Akutagawa. Your past experiences are an explanation, not an excuse. Kouyou feels like an abusive mother who never tells you why she is the way she is. And I try not to shit on female characters so much, especially in a series where they're sidelined enough, but damn, Asagiri did that shit way before I did. And yes, her being sidelined could be sexism. In fact, that's likely the case, and that's why she's so difficult for me to like. For Mori, we can try to deduce that the war is likely what traumatized him. For Dazai, it was Mori. For Akutagawa, it was Dazai. For Kyouka, it was Akutagawa and Kouyou. For Kouyou, all that was given was that there was a man who tried to rescue her. In fact, there is so much unanswered about her. Why is her ability exactly like Kyouka's? Are they blood related, and does this mean that abilities can be inherited in families? Also, why is she dressed like an oiran? Does she work in the red light district and resultantly participate in sex trafficking? No, the fandom isn't ready to face the music that the mafia does things that the mafia does. Forget I said that. All in all, I try not to hate on characters a lot, but when you simply give me the abusive aspects of her and not even official art and sentences and light novels to decode, there isn't gonna be something to decode. With Mori, moments of him where his mask slips off and official art portraying him being eaten alive while literally being pinned to a cross are deliberately given to us to understand his character, Kouyou doesn't even have that subtle treatment. Remember, it's not her fault she's been sidelined and made to look like an annoying-ass know-it-all abuser, but that's a discussion for a female character-oriented video that I will be making. Guys, you don't need to spam my comments. I will make a video on women in BSD. Of course I will. Now, I really don't have an outro plan for this one. Usually these are the moments I go off on a tangent about fandom behavior and get emotional about lines on a screen, but this is not one of those videos. Now, I could go on a tangent about the fandom's perception of the abuse cycle as more of a web of cause and effect, but I won't do that. This video has been my interpretation and analysis on the abuse web. To make fun of a bunch of kids on TikTok for not understanding the complexities of abuse would be shitty, to put it bluntly. Instead, I'll talk about one last abuser, Atsushi's abuser. the orphanage director. Now, in this video, I've talked about abusers who have done what they did for what they believe is the greater good. I've talked about abusers who have done irreversible damage on children and are actively trying to be better. I've talked about abusers who act out of jealousy and rage. And let me say that the orphanage director is none of these. This is one of the few times we're not meant to see the other side of the story when it comes to an abuser. Yes, he cared about Atsushi, but he fucking made him hammer a nail to his foot. What are you guys talking about? He is a remorseless abuser. He is one of the few characters you're not supposed to sympathize with. And yet, I see people searching for an ulterior motive and explanation when there isn't one. His abuse didn't come from anything except wanting to stamp the hope and happiness out of Atsushi. You could argue that he did it out of care, that he wanted to keep Atsushi safe from his own ability. You could also argue that he gave him a nice little watch and that makes up for years worth of psychological torture and PTSD. But why are you arguing? What is the point of defending a character that will never be expanded on again? I cannot emphasize how unproductive this argument that he's secretly a nice guy is when there are scenes of him calling Atsushi an unlovable, worthless piece of shit. There is a difference between Dazai, someone who is actively trying to be a better person, and this orphanage director who abused a child until that child was kicked out of the orphanage. Abusers can care about their victims, but that doesn't make their actions any less wrong or harmful. The director being kind to Sori at the end will never fix Atsushi's permanently damaged mental state. Kouyou can be defended. Mori can be defended. Dazai can be defended. But if you're out here in the trenches arguing over the fucking orphanage director, then you clearly miss the entire point of the manga. And if any dumbass comes to me in my comments and tries to tell me, oh, well, they defend Shibuzawa all the time and Shibuzawa is an even worse abuser. Yes, he is, but at least he has a personality. At least he is something outside of this abusive piece of shit. At least he likes fashion. At least he likes doing shit with his life. The orphanage director only exists to abuse. Shibuzawa made nice outfits, how about that? And as far as abuse goes, at least I don't see people out here in the trenches trying to say that Shibuzawa is understood for whatever reason. At least people accept the fact that he's abusive. At least people don't defend him. The fact that there are people out here that are making TikTok trying to insist that the orphanage director actually cared for Atsushi and then it's fine is so disgusting. You people have no idea how to like this manga properly. Oh, I'm sorry people like abusive asshole with a personality more than abusive asshole, period. You are not different or a better or a smarter person because you defend abusers. Nor are you more intelligent than other people. The orphanage director cannot and should not be defended. End of story. And now for an actual conclusion. What do we have to infer from this abuse web? Well, what we learn from Mori is that abusive behavior isn't so linear. It's not always a person that starts these chains. What we learn from Dazai is that people can change. Even if they aren't the best person, they can always try to be a little better. Just a little kinder. What we learn from Akutagawa is that a small bit of reassurance and just a little bit of care can go a long way. What we learn from Kyouka is that sometimes hurt people do hurt people, but some of them try to be a little more understanding than their predecessors. And Kouyou teaches us nothing. Sorry guys. Remember, it's okay to hate a character in this web who isn't Kyouka. Remember, it's okay to adore a character in this web. And more than all of those, it's okay to disagree with my interpretation. BSD is a piece of media where we're meant to discuss and interpret things in different ways, and that's fine. This was simply my take as per the demands of my subscribers. Going out of this video, there's only one thing to remember. Not everything is black and white. Except, of course, Akutagawa's color palette. I pushed out this video a lot faster than I thought I would, to be honest. I was saving this one for the end of the month, but then I finished editing in like one day and now I'm sitting here confused. Like, do I post it? I've decided I'll post it because March onwards, I will be going to university, everybody. So I will not be as active in posting videos, so you guys should be eating good while you still can. Other than that, did you know that you guys are likely seeing my video 24 hours later than I posted it? That's right, I uploaded it for my patroners way before you guys, and if you guys want to see my videos 24 hours for the general public, you guys totally can with my Patreon. Shout out to my patroners and do go check out my Patreon because it helps me a lot. It helped me fund my videos and maybe I'll be able to afford a good microphone one day so I don't spit at the mic every now and then. Other than that, I'm really happy to say that there is a ceasefire in Gaza. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that everyone's safe yet. Palestine is not free, and for that reason, you guys should still be going to Arab.org to help them out. Same thing for Turkish women. I have a post in my YouTube community tab that talks about all the dangers there are, and I had to update and make a new post because every single day there are new stories. Please do go spread the tags I'll be leaving in the description to help these women, and other than that, thank you so much for watching. My patroners actually have been asking for either a Nikolai or Odasaku video, so I might be doing one of those two next. Stay tuned. Go subscribe to my Patreon. It does help me a lot, and you guys will be able to pick my next ones in the future. Okay then, bye-bye.